Killer or hero, one human showed alien princess wrong in every way. The alien princess, Alara, stood on the bridge of her ship, looking out over the vast expanse of space. Her species, the Aelrians, had long been the dominant force in the galaxy. Their advanced technology and military power made them unstoppable, and they believed themselves to be the superior race in every way. Alara, as the princess and future ruler of her people, had been raised with this belief. Humans in her eyes were weak, chaotic, and utterly inferior. For years, the Aelrians had been observing Earth, sending scouts to study the primitive planet. Their findings were clear. Humanity was a danger to itself, constantly fighting wars, destroying their own environment, and unable to unify. They had little to no real technological progress compared to the Aelrians, and Alara's people saw them as nothing more than a stepping stone in their quest for control of the galaxy. But today, Alara had a mission. A rogue human soldier had been causing problems for her people, and it was her job to end it. The human, known as Captain Jake Sutherland, had been on the run for months. Alara had been briefed on his actions. He had single-handedly taken down several Aelrian patrols and even destroyed a military base. He was dangerous, a loose cannon who didn't fit into her view of humanity. She would capture him and show her people once again why humans were nothing more than pests. Alara's ship landed on the planet's surface in a remote area, far from any human settlements. She disembarked, her cloak flowing behind her and her bodyguards flanking her. The plan was simple: track down the human, neutralize him, and return to the ship. But Alara didn't expect what came next. The air was thick with tension as she walked through the dense forest, her eyes scanning for any signs of movement. Her soldiers, equipped with advanced weaponry, moved quietly behind her. They had tracked Sutherland to this remote location, and Alara was sure he would be easy to capture. But as they ventured deeper into the woods, something felt off. The ground beneath their feet shifted suddenly, and before Alara could react, a series of explosions rang out, sending dirt and rocks flying into the air. Her soldiers were thrown to the ground, and the alien princess barely managed to avoid the blast. In the chaos, she saw a figure darting through the trees, a human, but not like the ones she had seen before. Captain Sutherland was not what Alara had expected. He was taller than most humans, his muscles rippling under his combat gear. His eyes were cold, focused, and filled with a determination that sent a shiver down her spine. He moved with an agility that Alara hadn't anticipated, slipping through the trees with ease, his every motion calculated. Alara's first instinct was to strike. She raised her hand, signaling her soldiers to prepare for a counterattack. But as the human turned to face her, something in his expression caught her off guard. He wasn't scared. In fact, he didn't seem worried at all. He stood there calmly assessing the situation, as if he had expected this confrontation. "Princess Alara, I assume." His voice was deep, steady, and laced with a hint of amusement. Alara hesitated for a moment. How did he know who she was? She had never seen him before, but he clearly knew her name. "You're the one causing all this trouble," she said coldly, drawing her energy blade from her side. "I'm here to stop you." Sutherland didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace, though Alara could see the weapon holstered at his side. "I'm not the one causing trouble here, princess," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Your people have been hunting me down, and I've had enough. But if you want a fight, I'm ready." Alara narrowed her eyes. She had heard of human resilience, but this was something else. This human was fearless, something she hadn't encountered before. He wasn't trembling in the presence of a superior being. He wasn't begging for mercy. "You think you can stand against me?" Alara demanded. Her hand tightened around the hilt of her blade. "You're nothing but a man from a primitive planet." Sutherland's gaze softened slightly, but his expression remained resolute. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm more than you think." Before Alara could respond, he lunged at her with surprising speed. She barely had time to raise her blade to block his strike. The two clashed in a flurry of motion, their weapons clashing with a force that shook the ground. Alara's skill with a blade was unmatched among her people, but Sutherland fought with a raw, untamed energy that she wasn't accustomed to. He wasn't just skilled. He was determined, using every ounce of his strength and experience to keep her on the defensive. Their fight took them deeper into the forest, the trees around them splintering under the impact of their blows. Alara was fast, but the human was relentless, adapting to every move she made. She could feel her frustration rising. How was this human, with all his supposed flaws, able to match her at every turn? Sutherland didn't hesitate, his every movement sharp and purposeful. He was fighting for survival, for something greater than just himself, and it was beginning to show. Alara had underestimated him, and now she was struggling to regain control. At one point, they broke apart, both breathing heavily, sweat trickling down their faces. Alara's heart was pounding in her chest. She was used to being in control, used to being the strongest in the room, but this human had thrown her off balance. She had to admit reluctantly that she was impressed. "You're not like the others," she said, still trying to catch her breath. Sutherland gave a small smile. "I never was," he said, "but you're not going to win this fight if you keep thinking of me like you do the others." Alara's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you're thinking in terms of strength," Sutherland said, stepping back and sheathing his weapon. "But that's not what makes us strong. It's our will to survive. It's our hearts, our minds, and our ability to keep going when everything seems impossible. That's what makes humans dangerous, Princess." Alara's mind raced as she processed his words. Could it be true? Could humans truly be more than she had ever believed? She had always seen them as weak, as nothing more than an obstacle to her people's progress. But this man, this human soldier, had shown her that there was more to them than she had ever understood. "Why are you doing this?" Alara asked. "You're outnumbered, outmatched, you've already won. You could leave, walk away from this, and yet here you are, still fighting." Sutherland's expression softened, and for the first time, Alara saw something other than a soldier in his eyes. "Because I believe in something greater than just winning," he said quietly. "I believe in doing what's right, even when it's hard." Alara's heart skipped a beat. Could this human, this so-called killer, really be telling the truth? Was there more to his kind than the brutal, savage image she had painted in her mind? Before Alara could respond, the ground beneath them trembled, and a new danger approached. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Alara began to question everything she had known about humanity. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she might be wrong about them in every way. The next day, Alara stood at the edge of the forest, her mind racing. The battle from yesterday had ended in a strange stalemate. She had come to capture Captain Jake Sutherland, but instead, she had found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about humanity. The human soldier had fought her with all his strength, but it wasn't just his physical power that had caught her off guard. It was his belief in something greater. It was his refusal to give up, his unyielding drive to do what he thought was right, no matter the cost. Alara wasn't sure what to think. Her people, the Aryans, had always believed that they were superior to all other species. Their advanced technology and culture had made them rulers of the galaxy, and Alara had been raised to lead them to even greater heights. But this human soldier had challenged everything she had been taught. How could someone so simple, so human, have more strength than all of her people combined? She had never met anyone like him before. As she stood there, lost in thought, a voice broke through her contemplation. "Princess Alara?" She turned to see one of her officers approaching, his face serious. "What is it?" she asked, still not fully able to focus. "We've found something," he said, holding up a device in his hand. "It's a transmission from the human's ship." Alara's heart skipped a beat. A transmission? What could the human be planning now? "What does it say?" she demanded. The officer activated the device and the screen flickered to life. A message appeared, but it wasn't from Captain Sutherland. It was a broadcast, a warning. "This is Captain Jake Sutherland," the message began. "To whoever is listening, this message is for Princess Alara of the Aryans. If you are seeing this, it means you've caught up with me. But it's not too late. Your people don't have to do this. There's another way." Alara's brow furrowed as she listened to the message. How had he known about her? How had he known she would be watching? It seemed impossible, yet there it was, proof that this human knew something she didn't. The message continued. "I know you believe you are doing what's best for your people, but you're wrong. You don't understand what you're doing. You're hurting more than just humans. You're hurting the future of the entire galaxy. What your people are doing is only going to lead to destruction." Alara's mind raced as she processed his words. Destruction? What was he talking about? She had heard rumors of humans speaking out against the Aryans, but they were just scattered whispers. To think that this one soldier believed that his words could change anything was laughable, and yet his conviction was unmistakable. "I'm not asking you to stop," the message continued. I'm asking you to think about the bigger picture. We are not your enemies. We are a species just trying to survive, just like you. And if you're willing to listen, maybe we can find a way to help each other. The message ended abruptly, leaving Alara staring at the blank screen in disbelief. Princess, the officer said, breaking the silence. What do we do? Alara didn't answer immediately. She couldn't. She had never been one to question her orders, but Sutherland's message had struck a chord. He spoke of survival, of cooperation, of something bigger than just winning a battle. It was hard to ignore the truth in his words, no matter how much she wanted to. She turned away from the officer. Prepare a team, she said, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. We're going to meet him. Hours later, Alara stood at the edge of a clearing, watching as the human approached, Captain Sutherland. He walked toward her with his usual confidence, but there was something different about him today. He didn't have a weapon drawn, and he didn't look like he was planning to fight. Instead, he looked almost calm. Princess, he said, his voice calm but serious. I'm glad you decided to come. Alara nodded, though her mind was still racing. I heard your message. I figured you would, Sutherland replied, giving a small, knowing smile. I know you're not just here to kill me, not after what happened yesterday. Alara didn't respond. Instead, she crossed her arms, her gaze steady. You expect me to believe your words? You think I'll just change my mind about everything because of one message? Sutherland didn't seem offended. No, I don't expect that, he said. I'm just asking you to listen, that's all. I know it's hard to see beyond what you've been taught, but we're not enemies. We're just different. And maybe there's something we can do together. Alara's eyes narrowed. She had heard the stories of humans, how they fought each other endlessly, how they destroyed their own planet. But Sutherland's sincerity was undeniable. He was nothing like the human soldiers she had been told about. You think you can change me? She asked, her voice sharp. You think I'll just abandon everything I've ever believed? Sutherland shrugged. I don't know, but I think there's a chance if you want to see it. Alara stared at him, struggling to process what he was saying. She had come here to eliminate him, to show him that his species was nothing compared to hers. But now she wasn't so sure. Everything was starting to feel different. We've been at war for so long, both of us, Sutherland said, his voice quieter now. Maybe it's time we stopped fighting. Maybe we could help each other instead. Alara was silent for a long moment, considering his words. It was a radical thought, one she had never entertained, but something about it felt right. Her people had always conquered, always taken what they wanted. They had never considered cooperation. But now, with this human standing before her, everything seemed uncertain. I don't know if we can work together, Alara said finally, but I think you might be right. Maybe we don't have to be enemies. Sutherland's eyes softened, and for the first time, Alara saw the depth of his belief. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a human who believed that there was more to life than war and destruction. And that belief was something she hadn't expected. I don't expect you to change overnight, he said, but maybe this is the beginning of something better. Alara nodded slowly, still unsure of what this meant, but for the first time she felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this human wasn't just a killer after all. Perhaps, in his own way, he was a hero. The days that followed were unlike anything Alara had ever experienced. She spent more time with Captain Jake Sutherland than she had planned. He was persistent, always asking questions, pushing her to think differently. She had expected him to be like all the other humans she had encountered, reckless, loud, and easily intimidated. But he was nothing like that. Instead, he was calm, rational, and strangely honest. At first, Alara couldn't understand why she kept listening to him. She had come to the human world to end his life, to prove that her people were the superior species. But now, standing in the midst of a peaceful conversation with a human she had tried to kill, she began to wonder if she had been wrong about everything. Princess Alara, Sutherland's voice broke her thoughts. You look like you're a million miles away. She glanced up at him, standing across the room from her in her personal quarters. His relaxed demeanor never seemed to change, even though he was surrounded by soldiers, Aelrian guards who were still wary of him. She wasn't sure what they expected. Her own officers were starting to grow suspicious of her willingness to entertain his ideas. I was just thinking about how different you are from the others, she said quietly, almost to herself. I've never met anyone like you. Not sure if that's a good thing, Sutherland replied with a grin, but I'll take it as a compliment. Alara allowed herself a brief smile, but it quickly faded. It's hard for me to understand how you can keep believing in all this, she said. We are so different. Our people have always seen humans as inferior. I have no reason to think otherwise. Sutherland walked closer, lowering his voice slightly. I get that, I do, but you've only seen one side of us. I've spent my life trying to survive in a world that doesn't care if I live or die. But that doesn't mean I give up. We don't give up. That's what makes us who we are. Alara stared at him, trying to process his words. It was strange. She had never considered the possibility that humanity might have something valuable to offer. In her world, strength and control were everything. Weakness was something to be stamped out, to be crushed. But this human didn't fit into that mold, and she couldn't help but wonder if maybe he was right. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Alara found herself spending more and more time with Sutherland. At first, she had resisted, seeing it as a waste of her time. But the more she listened to him, the more she saw that there was something different about this human. He didn't want to fight, he didn't want to destroy her people, he just wanted peace. One evening, as the two of them sat on a balcony overlooking the alien city, Alara spoke again. You speak of peace, she said, her voice soft. But what if peace is impossible? My people have been at war for so long that we don't know how to stop. Our entire culture is built on conquest. Sutherland turned to face her. And what's the end of that? What happens when you've conquered everything? What's left to fight for? Alara paused, taken aback by the question. She had never considered it like that. We fight to stay in power, we fight to maintain control. And when you lose control, Sutherland pressed. What happens then? Alara shook her head, looking away. We don't lose control. That doesn't happen, doesn't it? He asked softly. You're not invincible, no one is. Alara didn't respond right away. Instead, she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the balcony. The night air was cool, and the distant lights of the city twinkled below. She looked out over the city, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. For the first time in her life, she felt uncertain. Sutherland's words echoed in her mind. You're not invincible. The truth of it stung more than she expected. She had been taught from a young age that her people were the pinnacle of strength. The Aelrians were meant to rule, to dominate, and nothing could challenge their authority. But now, as she stood on this balcony with a human, she began to realize how fragile that belief was. If her people continued down the path they had chosen, if they kept waging wars and seeking control, what would be left of them? We're not so different, you and I, Sutherland said, breaking her thoughts. You've got everything to lose, just like me. But you can choose to change. We all can. Alara's heart beat a little faster at his words. She had spent so many years fighting, always striving to prove herself worthy of her title, worthy of her people's expectations. But now she began to question what all that fighting had really been for. Was it for power, for control, or was there something more to life than winning? I'm not sure if I can change everything, she said quietly. I don't know if I can change my people. You don't have to change everything at once, Sutherland said gently. It starts with one person, one decision. That's how change happens, one step at a time. Alara turned to face him. There was no anger in his voice, no judgment, just a quiet sincerity that unsettled her. She had never felt more vulnerable. I don't know if I can make that decision, she whispered. Sutherland smiled softly. I think you can. Days passed, and Alara's thoughts remained in turmoil. She found herself torn between the life she had always known and the possibility of something different, something better. But every time she considered taking that step toward change, a part of her hesitated. Her people had spent centuries building an empire, and to question everything they had fought for felt like a betrayal. But there were moments, small moments, when she felt a glimmer of hope. When she saw Sutherland's quiet resolve, his willingness to keep pushing for peace, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was right. Could she lead her people in a different direction? Could she convince them to stop fighting, to start working with others instead of against them? The next morning, Alara met with her council. She had decided it was time to take action. As she entered the room, her advisors fell silent, their eyes on her. She could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. Alara, one of her generals, began, We've been tracking the human. He's still alive, but he's planning something. We need to act. Alara looked around at the faces of her people, their eyes filled with loyalty, with a burning desire to keep their power. She could feel the pull of that loyalty, the responsibility she had to her people. But she also felt something else, a desire for change, for something more than just conquest. I've decided, Alara said, her voice steady but filled with determination. We will stop the war. The room was silent, the shock evident on every face. "What?" the general asked, his voice rising. "You want to stop the war after everything we've done?" "Yes," Alara said firmly. "We will negotiate. We will find a way to end the conflict. I believe there's another way." Her words were met with disbelief, confusion, and anger. But Alara didn't flinch. She had made her decision. She had finally seen the truth. Maybe she couldn't change everything overnight, but she could start by making one choice. And that choice was to stop the fighting. Alara had made her decision. She could feel the weight of it settling in, heavy on her chest, as she walked through the grand halls of her palace. Her mind raced with the enormity of what she was about to do. Stopping the war, attempting peace, everything she had ever been taught seemed to be telling her it was the wrong choice. But as she thought about the human soldier, Jake Sutherland, and the things he had said, she knew she couldn't go back. The halls of the palace were silent as she passed, the sharp clicking of her boots the only sound breaking the quiet. The palace, like most of the Aelrian cities, was built to reflect their power, imposing, tall, with sharp angles and cold metal. But to Alara, everything seemed different now. The walls, once symbols of her people's might, now felt like barriers, walls that separated her from what she needed to do. Her council was waiting for her in the war room, and she could feel their eyes on her as she entered. They stood in a straight line, their faces filled with anticipation. They had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her to decide how they would proceed with the human problem. But today, their princess was not the same. "Alara," one of her generals began, his voice low but filled with authority, "you've called for this meeting. Do you have a plan to deal with the human threat?" Alara stopped in front of them, taking a deep breath. The room felt smaller than usual. She looked at the faces of the men and women in front of her, each one of them loyal to her, each one of them believing that power and war were the answers. But Alara knew now that they were wrong. "I have made my decision," Alara said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet strength she hadn't known she had. "The war is over." The room fell silent. The generals exchanged confused looks, their expressions a mix of disbelief and shock. Finally, the general who had spoken earlier stepped forward. "Alara," he said slowly, "you must be mistaken. The humans are a threat. We cannot let them believe they have one. We must crush them." "No," Alara said firmly. "We will negotiate. We will find a way to work with them." The general took a step back, his face pale. "You're asking us to abandon everything we've built, everything we've fought for. We cannot let the humans go unpunished." "They have not done anything to deserve punishment," Alara replied. "We have misunderstood them. All of this, everything we've done, it has been wrong." "Princess," the general said, his voice rising, "your people will not accept this. We cannot back down. You are the ruler of the Aelrians. You cannot show weakness." Alara looked him in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "I am not showing weakness," she said calmly. "I am showing strength. True strength is in the ability to admit when we are wrong and change, and I believe it is time for us to change." The generals were silent for a moment, staring at her in disbelief. But then one by one, their expressions began to soften. They had always known Alara to be strong, but now they saw a new kind of strength in her, a strength that wasn't about power but about understanding. "We will call for a ceasefire," Alara continued. "We will send emissaries to the humans. We will work together not as enemies but as equals." The room was still, but now the silence felt different. It wasn't the silence of resistance, it was the silence of contemplation. The generals were thinking. They were processing what she had said. Alara could feel the shift in the room, the beginning of something new. One of the generals, an older woman with a stern face, stepped forward. "If we are to do this, Princess, we must act quickly. The human forces will not wait forever." "They are already planning their next move," Alara nodded. "Then we move quickly, prepare the emissaries. I want them ready to leave within the hour." The generals looked at each other, then nodded. They didn't fully understand her decision, but they trusted her. And that was all Alara needed. Later that day, Alara stood on the balcony of her palace once more, staring out at the city below. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the gleaming buildings. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. It wasn't the kind of peace she had expected to find. She had always thought peace meant victory, power, control. But now she realized it meant something else. It meant understanding. It meant finding a way to live together, not above or below one another, but side by side. She had taken the first step. Now there was no turning back. "Princess," a voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Sutherland standing a few steps behind her. He had arrived earlier that day, and now, as he looked at her, there was a quiet understanding in his eyes. "You did it," he said simply. "You made the choice." Alara nodded, still gazing out at the city. "I did." Sutherland took a few steps closer, his voice gentle. "You know it won't be easy. There will be people who resist, who don't want to change." "I know," Alara replied, her voice steady, "but I believe in this. I believe we can change." Sutherland smiled, his eyes filled with admiration. "You're more than I ever expected, Alara." Alara turned to face him fully. For the first time, she saw him not as an enemy, but as an ally. "I'm not sure I am yet, but I want to be." He stepped closer, offering her a small but genuine smile. "You already are." The following weeks were filled with tension and uncertainty. The emissaries had been sent, and the ceasefire had been put into place. But not everyone was happy with Alara's decision. There were whispers of dissent among her people, some who couldn't understand why their princess had chosen to end the war. They had fought for so long, they had built their empire on conquest, and now everything seemed to be falling apart. But Alara remained firm. She knew that this was the only way forward. She had made her choice, and she would not back down. Sutherland stayed by her side through it all. He worked with her advisors, helping them to understand each other's cultures, their shared histories, and their common goals. It wasn't easy, and there were times when the tensions between the two sides seemed insurmountable. But with each passing day, Alara saw a glimmer of hope. One evening, after a particularly heated meeting with her generals, Alara stood alone in her room, staring out at the stars. She felt a deep sense of uncertainty, a fear that perhaps she had made a mistake. But just as she was about to turn away, there was a knock on the door. "Alara," Sutherland's voice called from the other side. "Are you all right?" She opened the door to find him standing there, looking at her with concern. "I don't know if I've done the right thing," she admitted, her voice quiet. Sutherland stepped inside, his expression softening. "You've done the hardest thing, what you believe is right, and that's all anyone can ask of you." Alara looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt. "But what if it's not enough?" Sutherland smiled gently. "You've already made a difference. The rest will come, one step at a time." Alara took a deep breath, feeling a weight lifting from her shoulders. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she was on the right path. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew she was no longer fighting alone. Alara stood on the balcony of her palace once again, watching the stars twinkle in the distance. The soft light from the twin moons bathed the city below in a silver glow. It was quiet tonight, a rare moment of peace in the midst of the changes that were happening around her. The decision she had made to stop the war had shaken her to the core, but now, weeks later, she felt a growing sense of resolve. The ceasefire had been agreed upon, and emissaries from both sides were working on a new peace agreement. It wasn't easy, and there were still many challenges ahead, but Alara knew they were on the right path. For the first time in her life, she felt hope for the future. Behind her, the sound of footsteps broke the silence, and she turned to see Sutherland walking toward her. His presence had become a constant in her life since that day they had met in the forest. He was there by her side, every step of the way, offering guidance, support, and a different perspective. His unwavering belief in peace had slowly begun to rub off on her. "You look lost in thought," he said, his voice warm and steady. Alara smiled softly, turning her gaze back to the stars. "I am. There's so much to consider, so much to change." Sutherland stepped closer, standing beside her as they both looked out over the city. "Change is never easy," he said quietly, "but you've already done something amazing. You've shown your people that there's another way. That's where it all starts." "I don't know if it's enough," Alara admitted, her voice tinged with doubt. "There are still so many who don't understand, who think I've betrayed everything we've worked for." "They'll come around," Sutherland said confidently. "It takes time, but they'll see what you're trying to do. They'll see that peace is the only way forward." Alara glanced at him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," he replied, offering her a reassuring smile. Alara took a deep breath, her mind racing with the weight of everything that had happened. The decision to end the war had not been an easy one. She had faced resistance from her generals, her advisors, and even her own people. But the more she had listened to Sutherland, the more she had seen that there was truth in his words. Peace wasn't something to be feared. It was something to be built. Slowly, carefully, and with great effort. For weeks, she had worked alongside him, negotiating with the human representatives, learning about their culture, their struggles, and their hopes. It hadn't been easy. There were moments when it felt like the gap between their two worlds was too wide to cross. But each small victory, each step closer to understanding, had felt like a triumph. "I'm still not sure how to get through to them," Alara said, her voice heavy with concern. "The hardliners, the ones who believe in the old ways, they're still out there plotting against me, against everything I'm trying to do." "You can't change everyone all at once," Sutherland said gently. "But you've already changed enough. You've started a conversation. That's what matters." Alara looked at him, a deep sense of gratitude welling up inside her. He had been more than just an ally. He had been a friend, a mentor, and a constant source of strength. She wasn't sure how she would have gotten through this without him. "I don't think I could have done this without you," she said softly. Sutherland smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "You did it yourself, Alara. You made the choice. I was just here to help guide you." Alara nodded, feeling a swell of emotion in her chest. She had made the choice, but it had been a difficult one. And now, as the peace talks continued and the future of her people hung in the balance, she knew that the path ahead would not be without its challenges. But she also knew that she had the strength to face them. The days that followed were filled with tense meetings and long hours of negotiation. Alara worked tirelessly to ensure that the peace process stayed on track. She had made the decision to stop the war, but now the real work had begun. It wasn't just about ending the fighting, it was about building something new, something that could last. The human representatives were cautiously optimistic, and despite the setbacks and the occasional disagreement, progress was being made. For the first time in a long time, Alara felt like she was part of something greater than herself. She wasn't just leading her people into battle. She was leading them into a future where peace, not war, was the goal. One afternoon, as the talks seemed to be reaching a critical point, Alara sat alone in her chambers, reviewing the documents and proposals that had been submitted. The weight of the decision she had made still felt heavy, but now it was a weight she could bear. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. She looked up to see Sutherland standing in the doorway, a familiar smile on his face. "You've been at this for hours," he said gently. "Don't you think you should take a break?" Alara smiled wearily. "I'm not sure I can afford to take a break. This is too important." "You're right," Sutherland said, stepping inside and sitting down across from her. "But you're no good to anyone if you burn yourself out. You need rest, too." Alara looked at him, her eyes softening. "I know. I want this to work so badly. I don't want to fail." Sutherland reached across the table, placing a hand gently on hers. "You won't fail. You've already done more than anyone could have expected. You've shown your people what true leadership looks like." "They'll follow you." Alara's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had always thought that leadership meant control, strength, and power. But now she saw that true leadership was about understanding, about guiding others toward something better. It was about showing them that there was always another way. "I hope you're right," Alara said quietly. Sutherland gave her a reassuring smile. "I know I am." The next few weeks brought more challenges, but also more hope. The peace talks continued to progress, and while there were still many obstacles to overcome, Alara felt more confident than ever that they were on the right path. The hardliners who had once opposed her were slowly being won over, and even the most skeptical members of her council were beginning to see the benefits of peace. The day the peace treaty was finally signed, Alara stood alongside Sutherland, the representatives from both sides, and her generals. It had taken months of hard work, of pushing through moments of doubt and fear, but they had done it. They had created something that could bring an end to the war and build a future based on cooperation, not conquest. As she signed the final document, Alara looked at Sutherland, who stood beside her. He gave her a small, encouraging nod, and for the first time in her life, Alara felt a sense of peace, real peace, not the peace of victory, but the peace of knowing they had done the right thing. "We did it," she whispered, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Sutherland smiled back. "You did it, Alara. You showed your people that peace is possible, and that's more powerful than anything else." Alara turned back to the treaty, feeling the weight of the moment sink in. The war was over. But more than that, she had started a new chapter for her people. A chapter where cooperation and understanding would guide them forward. And as she looked toward the future, she knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time, she felt ready to face them. With the strength to lead her people, and with the help of those who believed in peace, she knew there was nothing they couldn't overcome.